Hello and welcome back to Bridge the Gap. I am Nikki Steinhauer, and I am so glad that you were intrigued enough to join me here for our second episode. Today, I'm going to take you on a little journey, a deeply personal one about who I am, where I came from, and how my own experiences shaped the person I am today. And this is a critical part of why I became an energy healer. I'll just be sharing a few stories from my childhood and my upbringing, all from my own perspective. And let me emphasize this up front, okay? These are my own personal experiences. These are my truths as I saw them and as I felt these experiences and these events. Others in my family, they may recall events and things differently, and that is perfectly okay. It is important to acknowledge that we all filter experiences through our own lens and beliefs. In fact, psychology tells us that no two people perceive the same exact event in exactly the same way. Our unique experiences, our roles in our families, and even our birth order influence how we interpret the world around us. So, as you listen to my story, please just keep in mind that it is one piece of a larger puzzle, but it's my piece. And I am very honored to share it with you all here today, okay? Just know again that this is not an all inclusive list of events that have occurred in my life. We don't have time for that. That would just take us forever. But I will just give you guys just enough so you can have a good understanding of the energetic transitions that I went through as a child, as an adolescent, and as an adult that got me here today as an energy healer. So please be kind as I share these real life events and just listen with an open mind and with an open heart, because this portion of the podcast is an important pillar of my foundation. Although a tough one, a mostly healed one. To be honest, the journey of healing never really ends. But this is just one way that I decided to close the door on this chapter of my life. And honestly, I think I'm just kind of tired about talking about it, explaining it to new clients, why I am the way that I am, how I develop my gifts, things like that. It's kind of almost like PTSD, I guess you could say. I don't want to keep bringing it up and reliving it over and over again. It's not because it affects me, because this is a part of my story. It's significant, but it isn't what defines me. It's not a part of my story of where I'm going. So hopefully these next few episodes kind of put everything into perspective, and it will give me a direction to point people if they ever want to know a little bit more about me and my story and how I began my journey as an energy healer and why I did. I do have a few thoughts and a few facts that I would like to share before we fully dive in. Let's talk about perspective for just a second, okay? Did you know, as I just mentioned, even in a room full of people who are experiencing the same exact event, every single individual's interpretation is going to be extremely different. This is because our brains are wired to perceive the world through the lens of our own experiences, our own emotions, and our own beliefs. For example, in psychology, there's research that shows how your birth order can actually shape your personality and your perspective of the world. The oldest child often takes on this hero role, trying to please their parents and meet high expectations. The middle child often feel overlooked, and they usually develop this big sense of independence, while the youngest child often becomes the baby of the family who kind of receives more leniency or more attention. But in my family dynamic, being one of 7 kids, I was kind of a combination of the good child and the overlooked child. I was the one who did everything to keep the peace and fill my parents' emotional cups while also getting the short end of the stick in my endeavors to feel loved and appreciated, or even seen and acknowledged as a person, as a human being. I did take on responsibilities that were well beyond my years, but this role came with its own set of challenges, which basically shaped how I saw myself, how I saw other people, and how I interpreted the world around me. And this brings us to another aspect of the human mind that I'd like to speak about: disassociation. Many people who experience trauma in childhood, whether this is emotional, physical, or psychological, they report having fuzzy or unclear memories of their younger years. And this is because the brain, in an effort to protect itself, can suppress or block out painful memories. It's just kind of a survival mechanism, but it can leave gaps in our sense of self as well as our history and memories. And that's honestly exactly how my childhood feels to me. It is very unclear as well as fragmented. But let me go ahead and share with you all what I do remember. Most of my childhood, it's a complete blur, honestly, but the parts I do remember carry a lot of weight. Growing up, I really wasn't allowed to go out. I wasn't allowed to wear certain clothing or wear makeup. It's actually funny looking back because I was actually 20 years old when I actually bought my very own first makeup items. And I believe it was a $5 Almay Trio eyeshadow palette. You guys know what I'm talking about. It had like the 3 colors that you put on your eyelid, the color for the eyelid, the color for the crease, and the color for under your eyebrow. Basically, it's like a makeup for dummies. I also had some eyeliner and some mascara. And honestly, guys, I thought that I was on top of the world when I first bought my first pieces of makeup. Okay. It was probably less than $10, and I just felt absolutely amazing and empowered when I was buying this. But makeup to my dad was an advertisement for sex, and he had no trouble letting all of his daughters know that any woman who wears makeup is a whore, and that they just wanted attention and they just wanted men to have sex with them. So, expressing femininity in our household was definitely not encouraged. My sisters and we were kind of treated as boys or tomboys. I never owned a Barbie. I had race cars and a whole bunch of these like little McDonald's Happy Meal toys growing up. I never had a baby doll. While everyone else was walking around wearing these nice fashionable jeans and cute tops, I wore these Adidas tracksuits to school. My sisters and we joke now saying that we all look like these Hanson brothers, the Hanson Brothers band growing up with our clothes and our haircuts. We joke about it now, but back then it wasn't the greatest. But I'm not too sure why we weren't allowed to go over friends' houses. My only guess is that it gave us an opportunity to meet with boys and be whores. This is just a term that my father threw around a lot. It was a term that was said regularly to all of us, even my mom. Speaking of my mom, I do remember my mom finally letting me go out of the house and go around the block to what eventually became my best friend's house. And I want to say it was probably around seventh or eighth grade. I would get done school, I would speed walk home, go do my homework and go do my chores, and then I would finally be able to go over my friend's house. And I remember feeling so free just walking to her house, feeling the wind on my face, and just feeling that freedom. It was such a great escape. Again, looking back on my childhood, it was kind of funny because I didn't even realize it then, but I was only at her house for maybe 30 to 45 minutes a day, but it was a very liberating 30 to 45 minutes for me to have that experience, to be able to get out of my house, to be able to walk to a friend's house all by myself. I was at her house nearly every single weekday. And I remember trying to leave as late as I could because I didn't want to go home. And I remember racing the church bells home every time they would start ringing. And I knew as long as I started running by that first bell ring, that I could make it home by the fifth and be perfectly okay and be home on time. So, yeah, my mom had told me that I could go over my friend's house as long as my homework was done, as long as my chores were done, and as long as I was home by 5 p.m. This was the time that my dad got home from work. And then normally we would just eat dinner and then have some type of sports practice, mainly soccer. For everyone who doesn't know me, my escape throughout life was sports and before and after school programs and activities where I could get out of the house and feel just a little bit more freedom and like a person. And it was my attempt to have some form of a friendship with the people around me. Now, when it comes to my mom, she suffered from severe depression and anxiety. From as far back as I can remember, she would take medication that my dad always told us were her crazy pills because she was schizophrenic and she was delusional, just like his mom, my grandmother. I don't believe my mom was ever diagnosed as a schizophrenic, but when I look back now, I think it was just another scare tactic that my dad used against us all. As a child, the terms crazy, schizophrenic, delusional, whores, morons, idiots, these were typical family outing conversation starters. So, anyway, my mom was on medication, and the medication often left her sleeping all day. And that meant I was left to do most of the chores with very little to no support. All of my siblings, they eventually had to start doing chores around the house as they got older. We even had a chore board that hung on the wall. And for the longest time, I remember walking into my mom's room to tell my mom that, my homework was done, my chores were done, so that I could get the go ahead from her to go to my friend's house. But after a while, she started to ask me if my sister's chores were done. And I would tell her no. And then she would tell me that I couldn't go out until my sister's chores were done. And at this point, my sister is nowhere to be found because she would leave the house and be hanging somewhere with her own friends. She was a lot more outgoing and a lot more brave than I was. I was extremely terrified of getting in trouble. And she would just kind of go out and do what she wanted when she wanted most of the time. She was a lot more rebellious, we'll say, than I was. So I am pretty angry and confused at this point, knowing that I can't go out and play until my sister gets her chores done. But my sister is God knows where, right? So instead of waiting for her to come home and do her chores so that I can leave the house, I just ended up doing her chores for her so that I had more time at my friend's house. But it got to the point where she just stopped doing her chores altogether because she just knew that I would do them. And honestly, looking back at the situation, it was pretty smart on her part. She got to hang out with her friends longer. She wouldn't get in trouble for not doing her chores because I was doing them. And she knew that I wouldn't tell my dad on her because that would mean that I would be telling on myself. And my time to go to my friend's house would just be done because remember, we weren't supposed to be out anyway. So, yeah, I became the good child, the one who tried to make everything okay, make sure that everything was taken care of, that everyone was doing fine. And psychology calls this the golden child role, where a child works to fulfill their parents' needs, often at the expense of their own. And this is a trait that I thought was very admirable most of my life. You know, putting others first, that self sacrifice. But we're going to get into more of that in a minute. So, most of my life, I remember just most of my encounters with my mom as going into her bedroom, tapping on her shoulder to wake her up, to ask for whatever it was that I needed, and then I would just leave the room and she would fall back asleep. My father, on the other hand, was physically present for the most part, you know, maybe too physically, but extremely emotionally absent. He did work long hours to provide for us, but he also brought verbal as well as physical abuse into our household. And I cannot count how many times that I was told as a child that I was fat, ugly, stupid, or a whore, or that I was only an object that was good for sex. You know, even though I was a good kid growing up, I was an AB honor roll student most of my life, an accomplished soccer player. I was on varsity soccer, varsity softball, varsity cheerleading. I was the first girl raider in my high school for JRTC. I was on the drill team. You know, I very rarely ever got in trouble. Please remember that, like, my entire childhood, I was terrified to get into trouble, okay? But I would be punished anyway. The punishments most of the time were significantly disproportionate to the action. Like, I remember getting a C in one of my classes and being grounded for an entire semester, while one of my sisters who got all D's and F's and was on the brink of failing, but she was still allowed to go out and go do things with her friends. And if you don't know, this is a classic example of narcissistic parenting. And according to research, narcissistic parents often use discipline as a tool to exert control rather than as a fair and constructive way to kind of guide their children. So we were all afraid to get in trouble, you know, me, my brothers and sisters. And like many normal kids, we began to highlight our other siblings' faults. So the light and the negative attention wasn't on us. And after a while, my father began to use this fear tactic to his advantage. And he made sure to pit all of us against one another. My siblings, my mom, me. It was kind of like a divide and conquer strategy which again is also a classic in narcissistic families, to maintain control and prevent us all from forming alliances to rebel or to escape the control and release ourselves from the control. And in this environment, I was always in survival mode. We all were. I wasn't just taking care of myself, I was taking care of my entire family, my brothers and sisters' needs, my parents' needs, which as a parent myself today, I could never imagine putting that responsibility onto my own children. I actually heard something the other day that I thought was actually kind of funny, and it said, millennial parents are so good at being present and mindful parents because their children aren't the first time they're raising someone. They had to raise their parents too. And it makes sense why our parents turned out this way because we really didn't know what we were doing yet. And you always make your rookie mistakes with your first one. I just thought that was spot on. So I had to laugh and share that with you guys. But getting back, as I had mentioned before, one of the few escapes that I had was playing soccer. And I had played on at least 2 teams a season. I had played on teams that were 2 years ahead of my own age group, at my older sister's age group. That way that my dad could manage the time of practices and games a little easier. We were always kind of getting yelled at and criticized after games. Other parents would come up to me and say that I did a great job, and then I would get into the car and prepare myself for all of the screaming and all of the insults. I always felt like a complete failure. I knew that I could do something amazing and win a game, maybe score a goal, but to my dad, I never ran fast enough, or I never played hard enough, or I should have done this, I should have done that. And after a while, I just kind of shut down and I just stopped defending myself. I guess you can say I just kind of gave up because I just kind of knew I could never please him. Narcissists often try living through their children. They see their children as extensions of themselves, and they try to have their own achievements and desires become fulfilled through their child's accomplishments. They crave that external validation, and they try to use their child's achievements to boost their own ego. So I guess I was just a failure at boosting his ego because I just couldn't do anything right. Because after I shut down, he began to put more and more pressure on my older sister. My older sister, after a while, she began to get yelled at a lot more after games, which in a way was good for me as I became the overlooked child. You know, I didn't have to get yelled at or screamed at for hours and hours as we drove home from the games. But on the other hand, my sister began to lash out her pain onto me. Every game, she would yell at me and tell me that I sucked, and she would put me down to the point I couldn't hold it back anymore, and I would just begin crying on the soccer field. She would call me a baby, and it got to the point where it was starting to get out of hand and other parents started to get involved. So my dad had asked me if I wanted to go to a different team in a different town, and I agreed. I was ready to go. I couldn't take the criticism anymore, just coming from all angles. But when I finally got the chance to play with kids my own age, my parents never showed up. I didn't realize that moving to this new team meant that I had to grow up even faster. Because once the burden, me, was removed, I was no longer their problem. I had to fend for myself, looking in the phone book to get phone numbers of people I didn't even know, to ask them for a ride to games or to practices. It's kind of funny again, looking back, remembering myself looking at the team email, trying to piece together people's crazy email names, going down the list, finding the names in the phone book, calling about 3 to 4 people with the same last name and who live in the same town as my new team, hoping that the next call would have a daughter that played on my team so that I can ask them for a ride. Eventually, one girl's father finally got the hint. After me calling every single weekend, he just asked, "Do you want me to just come by and pick you up for every game every weekend?" I told him yes, and I was so relieved. And I remember being so excited every weekend, seeing his minivan pulling out front. It was just a quick little getaway every single weekend. Him and his daughter, who I eventually started to frequently play against in high school, they made me feel so welcome to the team, and they made me feel as if I belong. And I didn't get the criticism the entire way home. I got constructive criticism. I got, "Well done. Wow, you did great." I got praise. I got something that I had never gotten before. And people like that are truly a blessing. And I don't even think he realized how much he did for me. Season after season, I would go with them because my mom, she was too tired to bring me or to come to my games. And I only remember my dad attending one single game on my new team. And that was it. And it was actually during a soccer tournament. And my dad stopped by to give me some money for food because I needed to eat some lunch. And I remember being so excited that he showed up, that he was there, and that he was going to finally watch me play. He was going to see how good I was. But by halftime, when I looked for him, he was already gone. I guess my other sister had a game or something like that, but he was already gone. And it felt like I was just completely separate from my family. Like I didn't belong. And it probably didn't help that my entire life, people had told me that they thought it was weird because I was nothing like my family. And I never really knew what they were talking about or what they meant. All I knew was that it was just another way that I was separate and that I was alone. And that feeling only deepened as I grew older. My dad had strict rules, no dating until 16, no makeup because it was an advertisement for sex. All I could do was play sports. And when I finally turned 16 and I was asked to go to prom, oh my gosh, I was so excited. But when my date arrived, my dad turned him and his mother away. And that moment crushed me. The embarrassment, the anger of someone telling me that I could finally do something. And when I was able to do it, it was completely stripped away in an instant. I remember looking at my mom for some support, and she just said, "He will probably just meet you there." My mom never stood up for us in our later years. I guess she just kind of grew tired, just like me, over the years of trying and just kind of realizing that, you can never do enough or be enough. And after realizing that we were kind of all under my dad's illusion and we would always take his side. Even when events would happen, we were always going to pick him over her. I look back now and I don't know why we always picked his side, but we did. I do remember her, though, sticking up for us when we were younger, telling my dad to stop hitting us or getting between us and yelling at him. But like I said, after years of fighting, I guess she just kind of gave up and gave in. She, even after a while, began to partake in the abuse. I guess if you can't beat them, join them, right? So there were many times that I remember looking at my mom for help, and she would just look at me with this, I can't help you, or I'm not getting involved type of look, and just allowed me to get thrown under the bus multiple times. For example, I had just got done one of my indoor soccer games. And when we got home, my dad started yelling at my sister. I guess at the game, he had found out that my sister was secretly dating one of his friend's sons, and this whole outburst had occurred. It was nothing new. So I just stayed in my room and I stayed out of it. But for some reason, I had gotten pulled into the conversation to be questioned about the situation. As a child, please remember that I was terrified to get in trouble. And after a while, I had learned that lying only got me into bigger trouble. And at this point in my life, my sister and I, we didn't really have a very close relationship anymore because my sister had treated me so disgustingly over the years that I was pretty much at the point where I was like, why would I lie for you? Why would I get in trouble for you? You tell people at school lies about me. You try to humiliate me all the time. You criticize everything that I do. And you even try to fight me after school to prove to your friends that you can fight. So you could pretty much say that I was done with all of her shit at this point. So my dad had asked me some questions and I answered. And I even told him that my mom knew about them dating. And after I told my dad that she knew, she screamed at me, called me a liar, dragged me by my hair to the back door, threw me outside, and told me to never come back again. As I said before, I had just got done playing one of my indoor soccer games. So I was dressed in shorts and a sleeveless top. I had already taken off my cleats, my shin guards, my socks, so I was barefoot. And it was in the middle of winter, and it was late at night, so it was freezing cold outside. I didn't care though. I thought to myself, fine, you know what? I'm not going to come back. So I walked around the block to one of my friends' houses. I knew that I couldn't go knock on my best friend's house because her mom would probably absolutely kill her. So I went to, I guess you can call him a friend. He would ride his bike out by my house and we would talk outside my house as I was shooting my basketball, when my dad wasn't home. And we were very friendly at school. So to me, I considered him as a friend. I'm not really sure if he considered me as a friend, but I will call him my friend. But I had walked into his backyard and I began throwing rocks at his window. I guess he was a heavy sleeper because he did not end up coming to his window. So I started to walk out of his backyard, but I saw a police car coming down the road. So I instantly panicked. I crouched down near some cars and I saw the flashlights coming from the police vehicle. Oh my goodness. I held my breath as the cop cars passed. I did not want to get caught because it was after curfew. And even though I just got thrown out of my house, I did not want to get in trouble for breaking curfew. So when it was safe, when the cop cars passed, I went back into my friend's backyard. It felt safe back there, so that's where I wanted to stay. But I began to get really, really cold and extremely tired. So, not thinking, I leaned up against his pool and I fell asleep. not thinking that leaning up against cold water would make me even more cold, but I fell asleep anyway. And I remember waking up, shivering, rubbing my body to try to warm it up, and then falling back asleep. And then doing it again, waking up and then falling back asleep. And at one point, I woke up and my friend's mom was getting ready for work. And I saw her through the window preparing her things next to her sink. And for a moment, I just wanted to knock on her door. But I didn't want to get him in trouble. So I just sat there and I waited for her to leave. And as soon as she left, I tried to stand up and go knock on the door. But as I tried to stand, I was not able to feel or move my legs. So I crawled over and was eventually able to use a chair to pull myself up to stand up. But my legs kept collapsing on me. So I held myself up until the bottom of my feet started to tingle with this intense pain. I remember just rubbing and massaging and trying to get some blood flow into my legs to the point where I was eventually able to walk. So I went over and I knocked on his door and he didn't answer. And I didn't know what to do. So I just walked back home. The sun was up. I just remember being so cold and terrified to walk up the stairs to my house. But at this point, I had no choice. So as I walked in the door, my sisters and everyone, they were all getting ready to leave for school and shouted, "Nikki is back." And my mom ran over to me and she hugged me. And she kept saying, "Oh, you're so cold. Why did you leave the house? We had the cops looking out all night for you." And I just remember being so confused, especially because my parents made me stay home that day. I remember them being so nice to me that it actually terrified me. And when I went to school the next day, everyone kept coming up to me and asking me why I ran away from home. And I told them I never ran away. I was kicked out of my house. But then they all just kept saying, "That's not what your sister said. That's not what blah, blah, blah said." So, there was just another instance where my mom completely abandoned me and let me get into trouble. So I don't know about you guys, but I had to move out of my house right after graduation. There was just too much that I couldn't handle between my mom and my dad. So I moved out. And I would come home when my dad wasn't there to either grab some clothes or do some of my laundry real quick and see my brother and sisters before they went to school. I was pretty much living out of my car at this point. I would hang out with my friends during the day, then I would sleep in my car at night. But when I was 18, my mom told me that I could stay at the house because my parents were going on vacation. And I had a whole weekend that I could sleep in my old bed. I had asked my mom if I could have some people come over when they were gone, and I promised that I would clean the entire house and everything would be spotless when she got back. And she knew that I was good on my word, and she just said, "Just make sure it's clean when we get home." But this is another story of how my mom abandoned me. So I guess my sister was told that she could stay at the house too. She was living with a boyfriend, but when she came back to the house and she saw my friends there hanging out, she threatened to tell my dad that I had people at his house. I told her that mom already said that I could have people there and that I could be there. And I didn't really care if she told my dad because I had no real relationship with him at that point, anyways. And I went about my business with my friends, with my sister trying to sabotage our whole night with accusations and her telling my friends random weird things, trying to make them leave. But eventually she left us alone. And after a few days after my parents came home, I thought my dad would be at work as usual, so I went back to the house to grab some things. But he was home and he cornered me and he asked me why I had people in his house when he wasn't there. I looked at my mom and her eyes just grew bigger and bigger as she was staring at me, just giving me the don't you say a word kind of look. And I just remember thinking, I am just so done with this. I'm over it. Like, I just can't keep up this facade and the lying and the two-sidedness, honestly. So I just told my dad because my mom told me that I could have people over. And as he turned his back, I was able to run out the door and leave. You know, people on the outside always told me that they thought that I was so lucky. They saw the big house, the vacations, the soccer tournaments in Florida, but they didn't see the reality of what was actually going on. The fights during the family vacations, the screaming, the chaos, the cops being called to our house, my dad getting put into jail, Child Protective Services coming in and questioning us on multiple accounts, the knife holes in the bathroom door. There was a time that my dad got taken away, and when he came back into the house, he told us that our mom was sending him away and that we could never see him again. He sat us all down and fed us a whole story of how everything was my mom's fault and she's trying to take us all away. So, of course, when CPS came and questioned us, we all lied and said that my dad never was abusive and that everything that was done the night before, none of that ever happened, and that my mom was lying. And looking back now, I just realized that we were all just completely brainwashed by this false security that we were told to believe that as a family, we should protect ourselves from outsiders, basically. Even if that meant turning against my mom to allow my dad to stay because she was apparently off her crazy pills and calls this entire thing to happen. But don't worry, he will forgive her. And he always ensured, time after time, that all of this would stop. But unfortunately, we were all just too brainwashed and too scared to not believe him. Both my parents even ensured that their true characters weren't exposed and that their reputations were completely intact at all times. When we went to school the next day after a big event, we were always told not to talk about what happened. And if someone asked, say nothing and tell my parents immediately when we got home who asked or said something and what did they say. Narcissists are masters at creating a perfect facade to the outside world while keeping their family under tight control. To the world, we were this perfect family who went on beautiful family vacations, who had amazing kids who were good at sports, the picture perfect life and facade for any narcissist who had the entire world fooled. And in case you guys don't know, narcissists will also take their families out on vacation and tell their significant other that they're wanting to stay together for the children to guilt trip their significant other into staying with them. Even the house that we stayed in, even the house itself was a status symbol of all of that control. My father and I built what I call my childhood home. We built it together. Literally at 12 years old, I was carrying piles of 2x4s, sheets of plywood, building the frames with a nail gun, hanging drywall, and clearing land while my sisters and my brother either stayed home or went shopping with my mom. And I'm pretty sure I worked harder than most adults at this time. And I got praised by so many people who were walking by and by the surrounding neighbors saying, "Oh, your daughter's so strong," and that my dad was so lucky to have a competent companion while building the house. But for me, it only further isolated me and forced me to live in my own head and my own thoughts even more. My dad and I barely spoke the entire time we worked. It would be 8 to 12 hours sometimes, and he would just tell me what to do, and I would just go do it. It was hard for me to have a safe space between my mother and my father. My only refuge was in my own thoughts and in my own mind. I was completely disconnected from my physical body. It was both easier and safer for me to disconnect as the punches hit my body and as the consistent screaming in my face would happen. All of this childhood trauma, narcissistic abuse, emotional neglect, physical abuse left lasting scars. Trauma doesn't just disappear when you grow up. It manifests in your entire body, your mind, and your behavior. For me, the effects showed up in different ways. Physically, I carried chronic stress, which, if you don't know, it can lead to health issues like tension headaches, fatigue, and even a weakened immune system. And for the longest time, I fought with my immune system and various health issues, which energy healing has allowed me to finally balance. Psychologically, I struggled with self-worth, always feeling like I was never enough, not just for my parents, but to everyone I met. The horrible physical image of myself that I held onto for so many years made it nearly impossible for me to have an intimate relationship. If anyone called me pretty or complimented me, I instantly thought that they just wanted me for sex and I would push them away. I was truly terrified of having an intimate relationship while also desiring one so badly, for someone to just love and accept me for who I was. Behaviorally, I developed patterns of people pleasing and perfectionism, putting everyone else's needs ahead of my own, even when I was drowning, which I had come to learn all of these side effects are common in children who suffer from narcissistic parents. They grow up feeling like love is conditional, something that you have to earn, which is why when I joined the military, I consistently was burning myself out to prove myself, to prove to others that I was worthy. And the disassociation that I mentioned earlier, that stayed with me too. There were times when I felt like I was just going through the motions of life, disconnected from my emotions and my sense of self. As heavy as all of this sounds, sharing my story is a big part of my healing journey. And as I stated before, it's taken me years to understand the impact of my childhood, to break free from the patterns I grew up with, to escape the limited beliefs about myself, and to begin creating a life that felt authentic to me. So, this is just a very tiny peek into my story. And I hope that by sharing my story, I can help others feel less alone in their struggles. If you've experienced trauma, abuse, or neglect, know this: your story matters. Your healing matters. And it is never too late to bridge the gap between where you've been and where you want to go. So I just want to say thank you all so much for listening, and thank you for being a part of this journey with me. Next week, we will be diving into my transitional phase of healing. I will share stories of when I joined the military and how my past showed up in repeating patterns. If you can relate to my story, or if you want to share your story, let me know in the comments section. Be sure to follow this podcast, like this episode, and share it with your friends. Until next time, my friends.